I'm going for, let's see, how do I present here? Going for the ugliest PowerPoint presentation known to man. So, you know, on a rank of 1 to my eyes are bleeding. Let me know how this works for you. Hopefully hopefully we won't be spending too much time in PowerPoint. I personally hate PowerPoint presentations. I'm a go and do sort of a guy, so I'm gonna, you know, be showing you a lot more of these things rather than the PowerPoint is mostly for me to have an outline of the things that I wanted to talk about, so we're not gonna be living in there too much. But to give you kind of a background of what I wanted to talk about today, I called this presentation Beyond Hello World. And the reason for that is because, well, yeah, really quickly. The reason for that is because there are a lot of Hello World style presentations for SharePoint Framework. You can go onto YouTube and say how to get started with SharePoint Framework. There's a bunch of videos that show up. Microsoft has an absolutely fantastic tutorial that you can go through, and I'll be showing you the link on how to get to that here in just a minute. And there's a lot of different bloggers and things out there. And so the getting started, the getting to the point where you've got Hello World and it's showing up on a page, that kind of a thing, has been done a bunch of different times. And if you want to go through that presentation, I don't think I'm the most qualified person to do it, honestly. I think there's a lot better resources out there to get you to that point. But I don't think there's a whole lot of material out there that is, okay, now that I've got my Hello World, now that I have my initial web part set up, what do I do with it? And there's a lot of different directions that you can go at that point. And so that's kind of the purpose of the presentation. That's sort of what I'm going for. I'm going to start at an existing Hello World application, and then we're going to kind of take it to the next step. So we're going to go beyond Hello World. Here's the obligatory About Me slide that you have to put in every PowerPoint presentation. I don't know who came up with this rule, but I've been told it's a rule. So there it is. Some of the languages that I've worked with up in the top corner, kind of my programming history right there. Down at the bottom, some of the things that I'm interested in. I'm a gamer. In just about every sense of the word. I like card games, board games, computer games, video games, anything that I can really get together with, play with friends and have kind of a semi-competitive environment I really like. So you got Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, all the Blizzard games, that kind of thing. And there's my family. That picture's 2 years old now, maybe? Well, there's my family over on the right. They're cute. I like them. I'll keep them. So there's the About Me. Not on here as well. Just recently I got my MCSD, so I am MCSD certified to develop C# applications and host them on the web and everything like that. And I'm currently working for Sovereign SP. Shout out to them for being awesome. I just feel like it's going backwards. Okay, so I told you initially that Microsoft had a really, really good Hello World style tutorial that you could go through. This is the URL for it. Kind of long, I don't know if you want to do that, or you can just Google Hello World SPFx, something like that. I don't know, it should get you right here. That's the URL for it. And some of the things that it walks you through is how to set up your development environment. Depending on which version of the SharePoint framework you want to go to, you can either install Node version 8 or Node version 10. I don't know why it doesn't work on 9, but it doesn't. It walks you through how to get through your favorite IDE development environment like Visual Studio Code, which is what I'm going to be using today. Set up Yeoman, which is a templating library that allows you to get a lot of the initial Hello World code down onto your computer, that kind of a thing. I believe that there are certain versions that only work. I think if you're trying to use the framework before version 1.5, what's that? Yes. Yes, the latest versions of framework will work with either version of Node. I personally use Node 8.9 in my development, and it works fine even with the latest version of framework that's come out, and I think they're up to 1.9 on framework right now. But yeah, the earlier versions of framework, you're going to have to go with the Node 8 version. And then I think starting in either 1.4 or 1.5, you can go up to the 10 version of Node. As far as like performance or security or anything like that, I'm not aware of any advantages of picking one over the other. There might be. I just don't know what they are. Yeah, so Yeoman is your templating library. If you've ever used the full version of Visual Studio and you go like File, New Project or whatever, and it brings up all the different templates that you can install, and you click on one of those and it gives you like 400 files and a bunch of folders and stuff like that. Yeoman is the equivalent of that, setting up your initial project. Gulp is your build engine. You're going to use that to compile all of your code together, give you your executable. In this particular case, in the case of SharePoint Framework, it's also going to start a node server on your local machine and allow you to do development locally without actually having to go to the internet in any way. And then you're going to need the template for Yeoman, the SharePoint generator template. You'll get started by running that package. You can either run the current version, which, as I said, as of the recording of this video, is version 1.9, but there are ways to go back and install specific latest versions. I'm actually having to do that right now because I'm working on a government SharePoint site, and government, as I'm sure IRS knows, always seems to be late to everything. So their version of SharePoint is not actually compatible with 1.9 framework. So I have to specifically install older versions. So that is possible. I'm not going to be doing that for today's demo, but that is a possibility. You'll follow a bunch of prompts. One of the prompts will be, would you like to use any particular JavaScript library? In this demo that we're doing today, and in most of the documentation that you'll find online from Microsoft, they use the React library. So we're just going to be following their documentation because it's easier to get help if you're doing what Microsoft is doing, right? And then you're going to need to trust your dev certificate. Short explanation of that is, okay, long explanation of that is that most web browsers will not navigate to an HTTPS page unless there's a valid certificate that your machine trusts. And because Framework, the node server that it starts, runs an HTTPS web page from your local machine. If you don't, then your browser will not trust your local machine, and it causes problems. Anyway, all of this is covered in the tutorial. They give you step-by-step exactly what to type, where to type it, that kind of a thing. And that's how we get to Hello World. Okay, so I know I yada-yada'd over that really, really fast, but if you want more detailed explanation, that website at the top, or just Google Getting Started with SharePoint Framework, really, really good tutorial there. So once you have that set up, ooh, where'd it go? You will get something that looks like this. During the setup process, it asked me what did I want to name my, is this the right one? No, this is not the right one. This is the finished one. Shh, you didn't see that. Okay, that's the right one. During the setup, it'll ask you what do you want to name your web part that you're currently building. I decided to name it Demo 1 because I'm good at names. And so this is what you get. Like I said, you run the template, the Yeoman template. It gives you a whole bunch of files. Those of you who are familiar with kind of how Node works or whatever, you got your package manager right here. This is where you find out what version of the SharePoint framework that you're on. We're going and getting those packages at that specific version. So we're on version 1.9 right now. It gets you a couple of other packages. We're using the React library, so it goes and downloads those and gets it to us. Stuffs a bunch of stuff into the Node folder, and then basically we never have to worry about that again. Congratulations, you used a templating library. What we're really interested in is this right here. This is where we're going to spend the vast majority of our time. This is our web part right here. So how does it look? Well, we type gulp serve. Like I said, gulp is our build engine that we're going to be using to kind of compile our code, put things together. And as I said, in this particular case, it's going to launch a server on our local machine. You can see kind of down at the bottom there. Yeah, nope, wrong one again. That it started up a web server for us on localhost 4321. That's the default port that you get when you install the templating framework. And then it navigates us to the workbench. And it launched a web browser for us. This is the SharePoint workbench. Now I know this looks a lot like a website, and in some ways it is. Our machine is now acting as the web server, and it is hosting this particular website on localhost. However, because our machine is the server, we don't actually have to go to the internet for this. So this is non-internet connected. Most of the stuff that we're going to be doing today is going to be development that you can do on your local box by yourself without any internet connection or connecting to anything else. But this looks very similar, and it's supposed to, like a modern SharePoint web page, because that's what we're developing for. Eventually, we're going to make these web parts. We're going to hand them over to somebody. They're going to put them on a modern page. Technically, you can put them on a classic page too, but there are some weird mostly CSS and look and feel kind of things that don't work as well on classic pages. You can though. But mostly the idea is that they're going to put them on a modern web page, and it's going to look something like this. So we come onto the modern web page. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this if you've been to SharePoint Online. You can see that we don't have nearly as many web parts as we should. Again, that's because this is a local development environment. They figure you don't need everything that comes with SharePoint on a local development environment. However, we do see our demo 1 that's right here. So we'll go ahead and click that, and we get, welcome to SharePoint. This is Hello World. This is the end of all the tutorials that you'll go through online, the end of the Microsoft tutorial. You get welcome to SharePoint, customize your experience, and a button that says learn more. And we can kind of see how that translates to code right here. You know, here's our welcome to SharePoint, here's our customize the experience, here's the learn more button. And just to, you know, show that this is really live and kind of how the development experience works, we're going to blow all this up. Hi, Mom. Only one. So your basic development experience when you're doing this is you'll make changes like this. You'll see that it's kind of recompiling. All I had to do was save. It keeps the server running while you're doing all of this. And when you save it, when it detects that one of the files has changed, it kind of just runs the gulp build command again, rebuilds everything, and throws it back out to your web page. So once that's done rebuilding, we should be able to, oh, live updated. Got rid of all that stuff that we got from SharePoint. It says hello, Mom, or hi, Mom, right there. So that's kind of our development experience. We come in here, we make changes to whatever we want, and it shows up on the page. Works better with 2 screens, but because we're doing this presented thing, we got 1 screen, so I'm going to alt-tab a lot. Okay, so that's gulp serve. That's kind of how we get started. And it gives us that localhost 4321 workbench page that we can do our development against locally. Now, SharePoint has also been very kind to us, and I spent about the first 3 months doing my SPFx development without knowing this, and when I learned this, it changed my life. They have also given us a workbench in the cloud. So if you have a SharePoint Online server or a SharePoint Online tenant, you can go to a very similar workbench page, but one that is actually on the internet, one that is actually inside of your tenant. And the reason that this is really nice and really important is because there are certain things that we can do online that we can't do in our local workbench. For example, talk to SharePoint, talk to the lists and libraries that we have in SharePoint. Most of the things that you're going to be building with the SharePoint framework are not going to be little small standalone apps that can all exist on a single page. The vast majority of them are probably going to be forms where you're going to be saving data to a SharePoint list and library, or ways of reading from a SharePoint list or library and presenting that in some fancy way to your user. You can't really do that on a local workbench because you don't actually have a real SharePoint, which means you don't have any real lists or libraries to go against. However, as you can see, if you go to your tenant, go to any site on your tenant. It doesn't have to be the root site. It can be subsites. It can be any other site that you have on there. Once you got your tenant and your site, you go to /layouts, and then you can either do 15 or not. It'll redirect if you don't. But /layout or /_layouts/workbench, and you'll be presented with a very similar page to the one we just saw, but you'll actually be logged into a live SharePoint site. So you can do crazy things like ask who is logged in, and you'll be able to get user identification and things like that. Am I authenticated? That sort of a thing. Those come from being on live SharePoint sites. So in my opinion, using the local workbench is really, really good for getting an initial look and feel, setting up the way that it's going to appear. And then once you actually start interacting with real data or live data or things like that, you can just take your development experience, switch over to the live workbench. And that workbench page is coded in such a way that it will look at your local machine for a running node server. So you will be the server that will be serving the code up to a live SharePoint page. You just get the SharePoint context that comes with it.
One thing to add, I don't know if everyone was aware of this, Microsoft just announced a change to the Office 365 developer program, where you sign up for a development tenant, you get 1 year of an E5, I think it's 20 E5 licenses for free. So I mean, that is really pretty awesome. So that will include everything your company probably doesn't license. So that's the only kicker there is you might stumble across something you're like, hey, this is really cool, and then you go try to put it in your production tenant and maybe you're not licensed for it. But they're giving away tremendous benefits to anyone who wants to sign up. And it's not like you have to be a developer to sign up for the developer tenant. It could be that you are the power user and you just want a separate tenant where you can play around with stuff without the risk of breaking something in your production environment. So if you just Google with Bing the Office 365 developer program, then you should be able to find the details, walk through the sign up. It's really straightforward, easy, and you'll have your own, my custom domain.sharepoint.com where you can do all of this fun stuff and all of the other things that come with Office 365. So that includes mailboxes and Exchange, Power Apps, Flow, everything.
Do you know what that is? Do they charge you?
No.
It's free for
It's free.
the first year.
Okay.
And if you are licensed with like an MSDN subscription or something that a developer might traditionally be licensed with, it's free as long as that subscription is still valid. There's benefit that comes with it. I'm honestly not sure what they charge after that period.
So I'll tell actually real quick. I think that they may have changed it because it used to be you would get a full year and they would last for a year. Now they've been doing this new one where if you don't use it within 90 days, they'll close it. So if you keep using it, they'll keep extending it.
Right. You may
But
be able to use it
if you
forever.
have it kind of for a year and you come up on your renewal,
So even $25 per year, that's not bad.
That's actually what we're looking at right here. As part of preparing for this presentation about 4 days ago, I went and signed up for the developer program, got myself my own tenant specifically for this demo, joshcookdevelopment.sharepoint.com. So this is exactly what he's talking about. Like I said, I did this 4 days ago, got my own developer tenant. That's what we're going to be using for today's demo. No, it's good. It's good. I wasn't necessarily.
Making it more interactive.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, like you said, once you sign up for this tenant, it gives you 20 licenses. So you can create
20 or 25. And then what
25.
It's over half a year old, so I don't change that.
Hmm.
So it's the E3 license.
Yeah, I saw the
They
E5.
have moved it up recently.
Yeah.
One of the most fantastic differences between a developer environment and a regular environment is the developer environment allows you to put in 25 fake users. It has data there for you.
Yeah.
And it will run it as if they're live and active.
Mhm.
And so you can start to see, hey, teams should
Including
be
content.
used. Yeah, including content. You can't do that on a regular environment. It's only available in the developer tenant. And that's very helpful because sometimes as developers, we know the technology side, but to see it being used from a business perspective, really, that's a lot of fun.
And having just representative data available to work with.
I'm a little slow on the uptake today. Are you saying that without a license anywhere, anything, you can sign up for this? Or are you saying that because you already have an Office 365 license somewhere else, you're able to?
No license, no anything.
No license needed.
You can.
In fact, I might go sign up for one and then call it E-Rocks, SharePoint.com.
Yeah.
And then I'll invite you.
And I will put on your inventory.
Yeah, like I said, when I signed up for this,
Office 365 account.
what's that?
That's cheaper than the Office 365
Right, and then
account.
it's intended for development purposes only, so it's not like, hey, I'm gonna run my business on it.
Yeah, if they catch you using it for production things, there's a big, end user agreement that you have to agree to, saying you're not going to use this for production or making money or anything like that. But yeah, for a place to go play around, absolutely. I mean, they call it the Office 365 developer program, but if you just want a SharePoint environment that you can go wreck for funsies, like this is great. Like your
Josh found out.
boss is probably not going to be like, hey, if I just go activate everything in the site settings, what's going to happen? Like the boss probably not be good for that, but you sign up for one of these, go turn everything on, see what happens. Why not? I didn't. I tried to keep this as vanilla as humanly possible, but you could. Like nobody's going to care. It's my development environment. I do what I want.
Don't take ambient. You might forget about it one morning.
Should we leave that out?
So yeah, so this is my developer tenant. This is the page I was telling you about. I just went to the root site of the tenant, went to layouts, 15 workbench.aspx, brought me up to this page. Now, when I first loaded this page, I didn't have gulp serve running in my local environment. Like I said, this page is coded to look for that. So it actually popped up and gave me a warning saying, hey, you don't have a local server running. So, that could be a problem. You might want to look into that. But now that we have a local server running, all right, I'm not looking at that screen. There's too much of a delay. That warning should go away. it should look at my local environment. And if we come in here, you can see there's now all of the usual web parts that you can add that you're used to seeing on a live environment. But it also finds demo 1. That's being served off of my local machine. Hi, Mom. So that's how we do our development. You notice that when we were on our local environment, it did an auto renew. Like all I did was save it and it auto refreshed this page for us. That is one of the things you have to get used to when you're going up against a live SharePoint website. It won't automatically refresh. So you have to wait for your local environment to rebuild, then refresh the page, and then it will go get the new content for you. Minor detail. Probably nobody really cares.
So when we post this recording to YouTube, will you give the link to your mom so she can see the hi mom message?
There you go. There you go. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is tools that will make your developer's life easier. And not only will it make your developer's life easier, it will make your life easier as a manager or an admin or somebody who's requesting something from a developer, because you will be able to go in and kind of get an early idea of the kind of things that your developer can do easily. And I'll show you exactly how easy it is here in just a minute. But the reason that I personally use UI Fabric, there's a lot of different tools out there that allow you to quickly make websites. The most popular one that I'm aware of is Twitter Bootstrap. I don't know if there's any developers or people who've heard of that before, but I'm sure a lot of people have used that. Gives you kind of a layout, gives you some icons, gives you some different functionality, some buttons, things like that that you can make really quick and easy using their libraries. I personally like UI Fabric for the primary reason that it is the library that the SharePoint developers, the people at Microsoft who are making SharePoint, use. They use this library to build SharePoint. So when I use a UI Fabric text box to put a text box on the page, it's going to look like a SharePoint text box because it is a SharePoint text box. It's the same code that the developers at Microsoft are using to build SharePoint. So when you use UI Fabric to build a web part to put in it, it's going to look very much at home because it's using literally the same things they do. So we'll go ahead and I don't have it. There it is. So this is the UI Fabric documentation page, just developer.microsoft.com/fabric, or some Google search similar to that should get you kind of here. And they kind of split it up into a couple of different sections. We're going to start looking at the styles section. So it gives us a bunch of different things that we can use right here. First and foremost, we're going to look at layout. Now, this is a very important thing for your developers to kind of know and understand, and it makes their life as far as putting things on the page very, very easy. Essentially what this is saying, and Twitter Bootstrap and a couple of the other libraries use a very similar grid layout. This is kind of becoming industry standard to use a grid layout like this. But when you put something on the page, it used to be the developers would put it in divs. And they'd create these small divs and big divs or tables. I'm sure if you know, people have been around since the 90s or whatever, tables were the thing in the 90s. You put everything in tables. You put pictures in tables, and you had these crazy ways of making tables look all sorts of weird. Now kind of the industry standard thing that people are doing is this grid layout. So you put things on the page kind of in rows, and then you tell it how much of that row you want it to take up. So most of them, all of them that I'm aware of, split the page up into 12. And the reason for that is because you can split it very easily into half and half using a 6 and 6. You can do a 3-column, or what's generally called a newspaper layout, or you can do a 4-column layout. You can get all of those fairly easily with this. The 2 and the 1 are just bonuses. So you'll create a row of something, you'll put it on the page, and you'll say, I want it to take up 6 of my 12 columns, or half of what the available space is. And the nice thing about that is because now your developer doesn't have to worry about how big the page is. It just says take up half the available space. And it's responsive. So if the available space comes down to something like that, it still takes up half of the available space. Now that could cause some problems if you've got like a long text in there or something like that and it doesn't wrap properly, or you've got things that are side by side and in different scenarios like that your developer is going to have to work with. But it's very easy to say, can you just make a 3-column layout and put this in the first third, this in the second third, this in the third third. And it doesn't really matter if they're on a phone. They got a very, very narrow screen. It will still take up a third, a third, a third. Now on a phone, that's not very much space, but they can do that. If they're on a double wide monitor that has, 2,700 pixels across, it will still take a third, a third, and a third using this grid layout. And they kind of get that for free. The other thing that they get is not only is it responsive as to the size of the browser that way, but you can change how much space things are taking up based off of certain breakpoints. So I could say, if they have a screen that is between 1024 and 1365, which is kind of your standard desktop, then I want it to take up half of the screen or half of the available space. But if they're down on a phone, per se, if they're on a screen that's that wide or a web browser that's wide, I want it to take up an entire row. And so you can build these sort of responsive layouts based off of screen size. So you can say if I'm on a small screen, I want it to look kind of like this. If I'm on a medium screen, like a tablet or something like that, which generally falls into that range, or that range, depending on whether it's an upright tablet or a sideways tablet, then you can have a different layout that looks something like that. Or if you're just on a standard desktop or anything bigger, you can have a layout that looks like that. And it's all based essentially off of these percentages that you see down here. So on a small screen, I want it to take up the full row. On a medium screen, I want it to take up a half a row. And on a large desktop screen, I want it to take up a third of a row. And they get this essentially for free. All they have to do is type that much code right there. Essentially what this is saying is on a small screen, I want you to take up 6. On a medium-sized screen, I want you to take up 4. And on a large screen, I want you to take up 2. That's all your developer has to do. And they can define those sizes any way, anyhow, they can put anything in there that they want at that point. And the grid is also smart enough that if it gets too big, so if you tell it to do a 12 and a 12 on a single row, which can't be done because you only got 12 spots, it will just take whatever goes over and wrap it down into a next line. So even stupid developers can do it right. So that's kind of the grid. Like I said, I have a finished copy of this presentation. Would you guys like to see me actually typing out the code to get to that finished, or should I just go to the finished one, copy it, and kind of explain it? How much development time do you guys want to see here?
I trust the end state.
Yeah, I'd say go to the end state.
Okay. You got a question?
Just real quick. So when it resizes, does it also refocus the pictures? So, like a picture that's when you have a full screen can look a certain way, but when you go small,
Like a PNG that'll shrink.
yeah. So a lot of times, I know sometimes. Right, but will it use it?
So the answer to that is, and I hate this answer, and I apologize, but it depends.
Okay.
It depends a lot on how you put the picture on the page. You can put a picture on a page and say this picture is always going to be 500 pixels by 500 pixels. And I don't care what's going on around it. It will be that size. And then if you shrink your screen, you're just going to get the top corner of the picture. That's all you're going to get because it's going to try and force the picture to be that size. You can say, I want it to always be a certain width. But if the screen gets smaller this way, then the height can resize, and then you'll get a very squishy looking picture if they mess with their browser in that particular way. You can say, I want you just to try and resize it to fill whatever space it has, and it will pick the smallest out of the width and the height that it has and just fit itself into whatever parameters or borders that you have in there. That's all standard HTML stuff that just comes without any sort of libraries. In just a moment, we're going to get into the controls section of UI Fabric, and there are other ways of putting images on the page. So inside UI Fabric, I can actually put an image from UI Fabric, an image tag on there that gives me a whole bunch of different options. And some of those options are, how would you like this image to resize itself? Or how would you like it to fit itself? Or how would you like it to take up the space that it has? And then we've kind of turned control, rather than your browser trying to figure out how to do all of that, we've now taken control of that and given it to UI Fabric. Now UI Fabric will try and take control of how you want to do that. And you just pass in a parameter to the image, the image drawer that UI Fabric gets us. And then that gets us a more consistent experience across different browsers. So if you just leave it to the browser will kind of guess. Or you can specifically use CSS to force it to look a certain way, or you can use a plugin or a library or something like that to try and let it figure out how your image is supposed to look. So sorry for the it depends, but I hope that. Okay. All right, so let's grab this piece of it from our finished demo. And don't want to deal with that quite yet. And then in our CSS, we're going to grab, forget it, we'll just grab the whole thing. I don't want to keep copying over CSS. And there's a whole bunch of, again, like we blew up all that code that we initially got from our templating library. We're going to come in and take all this CSS that we get from Microsoft and say, we know better than you. Okay, so I showed you on that previous page on their documentation or whatever, how you would go about including that directly in line to say that this for a large size is going to be 4, or this for a medium size is going to be 2, something like that. We're going to abstract that one more step away, and we're going to do it in CSS rather than doing it directly in line in our code. So we're going to first have to establish our grid. And when we establish our grid, I'm just going to wrap the entire thing that we're building right here, the outermost div that we have, in a grid to say that everything in here has to follow the grid rules. Deal with it. Then inside of that, we're going to define our rows. Like I said, we're going to put everything on our page in rows, in chunks, and then we're going to tell it how much of that row we want to take up. And then I've defined a couple of properties right here. So we have something called a column 12 or a column full. You can use either one because that's how CSS works. And inside of that, I said this is a MS column. I said on a large screen, I want it to take up 12 spots. And on a small screen, I want it to take up 12 spots. And then we have a column 6 or a half column. And I've said this is also going to be a column. On a large screen, I want this to take up 6 slots, but on a small screen, I want this to take up 12 slots. So once you start shrinking down, this should take up the entire row that it has available to it. And I've done that with a couple of others. Oops. My control key is in a different place on this keyboard than the keyboard I've been using all day, so I keep hitting Function S instead of Control S to save.
Good luck with that.
Doesn't work as well when you do that. So you'll see how that translates into our code that we have here. So we've got our initial demo 1 that sets up our grid for us. We're going to say this is going to be one of the rows that we have access to, and it's going to be a half of a column. And then down here, we're going to have hi mom be in the other half of our column. So by setting that up and saving it, we should be able to come here. Whoa. And you'll see that this is what we have. So our entire available space goes from about the left right here to the right over here. And I've told each of those to take up about half. Again, it's responsive. So as this gets smaller, you'll see that blue box that we have available to us kind of gets smaller and smaller and smaller because it's still trying to take up half. And then eventually we're going to hit that small breakpoint. Yes, I know. Okay. Eventually we're going to hit that breakpoint. And remember, for both of these, I said when it gets to small, I want it to go to full width. So as we get smaller and smaller and smaller, there you go. Now you see that our blue box takes up the entire thing, and then down below it, our hi mom box takes up the entire thing. So this is essentially what it's going to look like on a phone. And this is what it's going to look like on a desktop. Didn't have to make any changes to the code to do that. And so by utilizing this grid layout that they've given to us, we can very quickly and very easily make phone versions of our website, tablet versions of our website, and desktop versions of our website without having to send down different versions of the code to whoever's looking at it. Also, if you're like me and you like to have lots and lots of web browsers open and you like them to all be about this big, seeing responsive websites is really, really nice. Because then when I shrink my web browser and stick it over here, it still looks nice on my web browser. Anyway.
So does that apply if you're on a modern page, you've got your section that's already in 3 parts? Is that 12 limited to that first third?
Yes. So
whatever
available space your web part has. So if I go in and hard code my web part and say you're only ever going to be 500 pixels big, then it doesn't matter what the browser is doing. It doesn't matter how big the browser gets. my web part only has 500 pixels and it will try to take up half of that 500 pixel space? Good question. Okay, so that's grid. Icons and buttons. So kind of what I'm trying to do today and what I'm sort of working towards to give me just sort of a platform to make this happen is I'm thinking about doing a to-do list app. Now I know that Microsoft has their product to do, which I'm sure does way better than this, but just for the sake of, I needed something to build. We're trying to build a to-do list app that will allow you to see what's on your to-do list, store them in a SharePoint list, read them back from the SharePoint list, and then check off, yes, this is done, add new ones, that kind of a thing. Anyway, the reason I bring that up is because the next thing I want to talk about is the icons that we have available to us. We're going to make a little save button in our app right here so that we can, whenever we make changes to our to-do list, we can save it. Again, another reason that I love UI Fabric is because not only did they give us this grid, they give us icons. So very easily, very simply, we can go in here and look at some of these Fabric icons. And these are all things that we essentially get for free. So again, from an administrator or a manager perspective, it would be very easy for you to say, oh, I want to have kind of an icon on the page or something. I want to have a button that they can click that looks sort of like this. And you can come in here and look through all these and decide which one you like the best. Or if you don't want to look through all of them, they've got a nice little search feature. You can kind of guess and see. We're going to maybe make a save button. So I'm going to type in the word save. There's a couple of different things. We have a save button. We have a save as button. We have a lifesaver button, saver lock button, save and close button. So there's a couple of different saves. Anybody got a preference? Anybody got a favorite button they want to use?
Old school save.
Old school save? All right, old school save. So we're going to throw that button on our page. And if we scroll up a little bit in our Microsoft documentation, it says, oh, this is how you throw something on the page. So I'm just going to do that. So we're going to import our icon button from their documentation right here. So now we have access to icon buttons. And whoops, wrong browser. And we're going to get an icon button from here. And instead of hi mom, we'll put a button right like this. Now those of you who are familiar with HTML or development, that kind of a thing, this should look fairly familiar to you. We're not really bringing in any special code per se. We're not doing any new kind of language. We're not doing any strange development. Any first year college student who's learning how to do development should be able to look at this right here and say, oh, that looks exactly like HTML, because it is exactly like HTML. It is basic HTML right here. Well, not basic HTML, it's slightly more complicated HTML. But anything that you can do in HTML, you can do right here. You can add different properties. So we're going to add a title property. We'll call that save. We're going to add a label property, call that save, because Google bots and things like that that parse your page really, really like these labels. And then for our icon properties, this is a special one that is applied just to this icon button. It needs to know what icon do I want to show, so we're going to give it that name that we just found, save. And with just that much code, that much change.
Do you push something to compile your code, or does it just do it automatically?
I hit the save button. And oh look, I left a little semicolon in there. Isn't that cute? But you can see this nice little icon shows right up on the page, just that fast, 4 lines of code. There we go, we got a nice pretty icon. The other interesting thing about that icon is that it behaves as text. So anything that you could do with text on this page, you can do with these icons. If you want to change the font color, like you would with text, you can change the color of that button. If you want to make it bigger, you just set the font size. In all ways, shapes, and forms, it thinks it's text on the page, and you can treat it as text on the page. If you have a whole bunch of icons and you don't want them to wrap, you can set the no wrap property. The icons will run off the end of the page, or you can do ellipses with extra icons. it behaves and acts just like fonts, just like you were typing that onto the page. So I think that's a little bit small. So we're going to set the style attribute here, and we're going to say the style font size, we're going to double it to EM. What quotes is that here? And then when that gets finished recompiling, it should refresh my page for me. Didn't work. Cool. Did I do it there? No, I didn't. Yeah, font size 2 EM. That should have worked. Oh, there's the semicolon that I left in there. Anyway, not entirely sure why that didn't work, but theoretically it should work. Yada yada. Pay no attention to the man behind the mask. Right. So again, these are all the buttons that we have available to us, but we don't just have these buttons that come with Fabric. There's also a couple of other things. We can get specific Office branded buttons. So if I wanted to come in here and say I really wanted this PowerPoint button somewhere on the page, or this Excel button somewhere on the page, or whatever, we get all those buttons for free from Microsoft. And again, because this is Microsoft's library that they are actively developing with, if they decide for some silly reason that the SharePoint logo should turn green, because they did that, it will come out in the next version of the SharePoint Fabric library and will be automatically imported into all of your web parts that you're using. So this will keep you up to date with everything that Microsoft wants to do with their branding. Also, we have file type icons that we can put, and I'm sure you guys have all seen those floating around. If you've ever worked with a document library inside SharePoint, I'm sure you've seen many of these icons before. We have full access to them. We can put them anywhere we want. So cool. Other things that we get from using UI Fabric. Colors. You really, really want to have something on your screen that is Excel green? Well, there's your hex code. Congratulations, you now know what color Excel green is. Or PowerPoint red, or Publisher teal? I don't know. All of these colors are available to you, and you can either use the hex code that they give you right there, or there is a way, I'm not going to go through it right now, but there is a way that you can import these are called themes. You can import the theme into your project and just, sorry, what was that? Yeah. You can just import the theme and say, I want the access color. And again, you have the latest access color that Microsoft is using in all of their branding and everything like that. But the reason that colors is really important is not necessarily so that you can get these static colors, but you can do something really, really awesome and amazing with it. And that is by using the SharePoint themes. I don't know how many of you have done this or seen this on your own personal SharePoint site, but you can change the look of your SharePoint site, right? So you can come in here, maybe, there we go. And you can set these themes. And you can see that there's all sorts of interesting color choices that they have here. And each one of these color choices that's in here, let's say that we wanted to go with this orange, gives you a certain palette that you can play with. It gives you a primary color, a primary dark color, a primary light color, an accent dark, different things like that. And those are all explained kind of down here. So you have a theme darker color and a theme dark color and a theme primary color, different things like that. And those get set at the SharePoint level when you use this theme customizer right here. So I'm going to take my development tenant and I'm going to turn it orange because I'm just that silly. And then I'm going to come into my demo module and I'm going to say anything that has the class red, not a good name, I'm aware, instead of actually being red, is going to be whatever the theme's primary theme color is. Now, as a developer, I don't have to care what your SharePoint site looks like anymore. I just say, that button is going to be whatever your primary color is on your site. And then it fits in. Because hopefully your primary color fits in with your site. If it doesn't, you got bigger problems to deal with. So I'm going to come into my little save button that I have right here. Hopefully this modification works better than the last one. And I'm going to say that it's going to gain the class of styles red. Now, on my local workbench, that shouldn't actually change the color of it. Well, actually, no, it should, because my primary color, you can see kind of up here in the corner, is blue. So it should take this button and make it blue. Not what I thought it was going to do. I must have put that class name in the wrong place. Anyway, but you'll see that it matches the primary color of the site. Now, without changing any code or doing anything differently, if I go to the workbench that's on my development site that I just turned orange, you'll see that the exact same code running on a different site now makes everything orange. Great. As a developer, I don't have to worry about what color your site is anymore. I just pick the themes, move on with life. And if it looks ugly, I tell you to change your theme. Oh, did I lose my presentation? I did. Colors and themes. So those are some of the stylistic things, and there are more. Okay. There are more things that you can get from UI Fabric, but those are kind of the initial things that I wanted to go over. Just some ways that your developer can use the styles that they get from UI Fabric to help make things look nice and pretty for you. Again, there's a lot more, and again, none of this actually required me to connect to the internet. I mean, I went to the internet to look at the documentation and to copy some code and things like that, but when I'm doing my local development, all of this can be done on my local machine without any connection to the internet or any other site or anything like that. Other things that we get from UI Fabric that make it really, really awesome library, we get controls. We kind of touched on this a little bit just a moment ago, but we'll go into it a little bit more detail right here. So one of the nice controls that we get is a text field. That's probably the most basic control that we get access to. So we're going to come up here. We're going to switch from our little styles section to our controls section right here. We're going to look at some of these inputs that we have. So these are all things that very, very easily your developer can throw onto your page, make part of your form or your site or whatever it is that they're building for you. Quite easily just drop it onto the page and get the exact same functionality that we get out of SharePoint. So for example, if I wanted to do like a checkbox or something like that, have a checkbox be on the page, I can come right here, and this is theoretically what these checkboxes should look like on the page. And again, it looks very SharePoint-y. It looks very at home inside of a SharePoint site because it is the exact same checkboxes that SharePoint's using. And there's a bunch of different things that we can do with it. We can disable these checkboxes. We can control these checkboxes. We can, this is not a very, we can make them look slightly differently. We can have sort of checked, unchecked, maybe checked, different things like that, indeterminate checks. That's not a great example. We can use combo boxes. So you can have these drop lists that, again, look very SharePoint-y because that's what you get in SharePoint. You can put headings inside of your combo box, options, horizontal lines, different things like that. All these things are very, very easy to do. We are going to use probably the most common one for our first demo, and that is the text field. Just a place where somebody can go in and type something. So let's say that we just wanted this everyday, standard, normal text field. We want to be able to drop it on our page or whatever. Again, as someone who's designing a web part or a programmer, you can go to them and say, hey, that masked web part or that masked text field that I got right there, that looks really, really cool. Can you throw that into the web part that we're designing together or something like that? And they should be able to say, yeah, sure, that looks awesome. Let me just grab the code right here. This is that standard text box that we looked at. There's a disabled text box. There's a read-only text box. You can have placeholders that start out with a little shadow text that's in there or whatever, and then when you start typing, it goes away. And
So, Josh, I'm curious, I watched you work. It looks like you literally go to the Microsoft site and do a lot of copy and pasting.
yes.
That's what you just go, you just have these things bookmarked, and you go in there
Uh-huh.
and you pick text field, and that's what you do.
I'm lazy. Microsoft's gonna write my
Less impressive.
Microsoft's gonna write my code for me. Why would I write it?
Gives me hope, right? I'm an info path expert, which doesn't do me hardly any good anymore, at least for the next. But we're using Josh so much to replace info path with custom forms, and this is how he does it. And I was kind of unaware that it was as easy as, grabbing pre.
It's actually not this easy. I will warn you. When you're gonna do it.
No, I'm sure it is.
Well,
just the fact that there's a library of pre-formatted text or pre-formatted code. Like, if I needed to maintain this.
yes. Well, so there's kind of two sides to building these web parts. And the first side is kind of what I've shown you so far, and that is the look and feel and layout of how everything is going to appear on the page. And that they have made very, very easy. And yes, absolutely. I think anybody, even a non-programmer, could probably go in and do sort of what I'm showing you right now to create the look and the feel and the layout and how wide something is going to be and how tall it's going to be, where it's going to show up on the page, what labels are going to be there. I think anybody could do that, whether you know code or not. I think it'd be very, very simple within a matter of a day to be able to do a lot of the things that I'm doing here at a very high level. Getting them all to work is a very different story. So putting a text box on.
The style change is often all you need.
Yes.
I mean, that's great.
And again, if you're doing this in a production environment, you're part of a team or something like that, you're a manager, an administrator, somebody comes to you and says, hey, this text box needs to be wider, or we need to move this label or something right there. How awesome would it be if you could just go and fix that right there without bothering your developer? Developers are expensive, right? Like, you don't want to take up much of their time doing dumb little things like that. So you go in and change it and move on with life, and everybody's happy. You get really fast turnaround. You never have to bother them. It's great. There's a lot of stuff that anybody, I think, could do. So we stole that text box. We're going to make a new row. And we're going to say, oh, how did I do that? That's cool. Instead of being half of the column wide, close that, close that. And even if you can't do it, as I said, any college developer, any wet behind the ears guy that you hire right out of college or still in college should be able to do what I'm doing right here as well. Instead of doing a half column, we're going to do a third of a column, which should be 4, 8, 12. Yeah, 4 bits wide. We don't have the text field library imported right yet, so I'm going to not hit function because my control key is in the wrong place. Ah, it's not going to do that for us. Okay, fine. So instead of our icon button, we're going to get a text field. Is that? Nope. And we're going to get it from the React library text field. Okay, that should make all the squigglies go away. And we'll wait for this to refresh. And once it does, we should now have a second row of data because we just added another row. In that second row of data, we should have a text field that takes up about 1/3 of the available space of that row, and it should have the label standard. Again, this should look very SharePoint because it's part of the UI fabric. Should be able to type into that and do that just fine. That's one of the more basic controls that we can use, but as you can see, there's a whole lot more that we can do. We can do drop-down lists, we can do choice groups. So if you have different options, but you only want them to be able to pick one of them, you can set that up. You can do spinner buttons. We can do checkboxes. I think I was going to do a checkbox one because we're doing a to-do list, right? Oh, I had it be a toggle. That's what I did. Again, I just realized I'm really running low on time, so we're going to speed through a lot of this here. What's that? So we're actually going to change this a little bit. We're going to have the text box take up half of the space because that's where we're going to type in what our to-do list is. We're going to have a date picker that's going to take up about a third of the space, and then we're just going to have a little done or not done toggle that's going to take up a much smaller amount of space. And again, we can change that layout fairly easily. We don't have toggle, so let's go import the toggle library. Ta-da. Yeah, we're not going to deal with that. There's no way I'm going to get to that today. This should refresh, and we should see what I was talking about. Now our text box is going to take up half of the available space. We've left a little bit of space for a date picker so that you can say when the due date of that particular option is or something like that. And then there's a little switch over here. It says it's either in the to-do mode or it's done. And again, very simple to do that. I literally added these, and then honestly, I didn't even need that one or that one. So these 4 lines of code right here saying add a toggle. This is the on text, this is the off text. Is all we needed to be able to put something this nice, classy, good looking right onto our SharePoint page. And of course, I just changed that in my finished demo. Actually, maybe I'll just take the whole finished demo and just copy it over, since I'm really running out of time. Oh, except that's not actually going to work yet. Okay. Date picker, yes. So the last thing that I wanted to add in there, like I said, was a date picker. And the date picker takes a little bit more work than the other ones. Ooh, many errors. All right, never mind. I'm not going to paste all that. Go back, go back, go back. Undo. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. So we'll come in here and we'll look at one of the more complicated ones. Uh-oh. Pickers. There we go. That would be a good place to find a date picker. So again, what is a date picker going to look like? Well, it's going to have a little text field looking thing like this. It's going to have a little calendar off to the side or whatever. And when I click on the button, it's going to show me the date. It can even show me the month over here. There are different versions of it. I can do one that have the week numbers that show up over here on the side. I can change the first day of the week. So if for some reason Wednesday is where we start now, Wednesday is the first day of the week. All of these things have code examples behind them. So again, you could take that, hand it to your programmer, and they should be able to just copy and paste directly off of here. We're just going to use the standard default date picker. Now, when I open this up and look inside of it, we've got our date picker right here. So we're going to steal the date picker directly off of Microsoft's website. That's the finished one. You think I would learn. Paste it in here. Again, we don't have date picker yet, so let's go import date picker from the date picker library. And don't care about that right now. Now you'll notice that the date picker is a little bit more complicated than some of the other ones. This, I needed an on text and an off text in order to show up what's on the screen. With the icon, I actually had to tell it, what the type of icon that it was supposed to show up is going to be. And here, I need to know what the first day of the week is going to be, and then I need a whole bunch of strings. I need to tell it what is the short date for Monday, and what is the long date for Monday, and what is the short date for Tuesday, and what are the months called, and the shorts for the months, and all that other stuff. And so I could go in and change every one of those and make the calendar look really, really silly, and do it maybe in different languages or different things like that. But that, again, is too much work, and I don't like doing that much work. And these demos come fully finished. So I'm going to go steal Microsoft's code again, because I don't like writing code if I don't have to. throw it up in the top of here. You don't know what that is, so we'll import it there. And now we have this thing called day picker string. So this is the names of all of the months. This is the short name of all the months. These are the days, the short name of the days. The button, like if you mouse over the back button or the forward button, you know what's going to pop up when you hold the mouse over that, the different buttons, what they're called, that kind of a thing. All of that's defined in here. Microsoft did it all for me. Great, thank you. And that one goes away. And then for the first day of the week, I'm just going to hard code this. I don't want to be all clever about it. I'm just going to say Sunday is the first day of the week. That was another import that I added up here to this date picker library. So now I've got the date picker library. I've got this definition for date picker strings. And I have this day of week thing right here. That all came from UI Fabric library or whatever. So Sunday is the first day of the week. Congratulations. And with just that much code, should be able to come back into here in that little white space that we left in the middle. We should see a date picker. And we click on the date picker. We choose the 19th of December, and it fills that in for us, nice and pretty. Again, not a lot of work to put these things together. Microsoft did all the hard stuff for us. All we have to do is find it, copy it, and then go tell our boss that we're doing a really good job. As you saw, I very effectively, tricked Pete into thinking that I know what I'm doing.
I'm quite impressed. I really want to watch this to see how far away I am.
Something that I'm not going to take the time to go into necessarily here. Dates are hard. If anybody has ever done any, I got one nod. Yes, you're a programmer, I can tell. Dates are hard. So when you're using a date picker, when you're using any sort of date calculation, when you're doing anything displaying a date on the screen, actually turns out to be incredibly difficult. Traversing time zones, making sure that you keep track of what just happened, we removed the clock's daylight savings time. All of that is really, really hard. But there's this beautiful library out there called moment.js that will make everybody's life easier. So if you're if you're ever doing anything with dates, I will tell you that that is a fantastic thing. And how do we get Moment into our project if we want to use it? Well, we'll break our server right here for just a minute. No, I don't want to do a survey. Go away. Again, Microsoft is kind of moving away from, I guess I shouldn't say again, I haven't said this yet. Microsoft, in their programming style, has kind of started moving away from using their own proprietary things. You know, when you install the full version of Visual Studio, you get a bunch of templates that Microsoft has done. You get a build engine inside of there, the MS Build, that is a Microsoft proprietary thing. You get all of this Microsoft proprietary code. You can build .NET projects or C# projects that for until just recently were Microsoft proprietary things. They want you to live in their world. That's how Microsoft has been for many, many, many years. But as of Satya taking over, essentially, they have decided that they're going to play nice with all the other boys. And so they've taken their C# libraries and their .NET libraries and they've open sourced them and added them to the open source community. And they've started taking their development environments and using more of the other tools. That's why when we set this up, we didn't install any Microsoft tools to do it. We installed Yeoman, which is an open source library. We installed Gulp, which is an open source library. And these things that we're doing are built on Node. And just like any other Node thing that we can do, we can use the Node package manager to go get more things and add them to our project. So I want to use the Moment library. So I'm just going to say npm install Moment. Where's it? Moment.js. And make sure that I save that so that if somebody else gets my code, they'll be able to get it too. And just that quickly, that easily, that fast, it's going to go out to the internet, get the Moment.js library, bring it down and install it for me. If I want to use it, I just import Moment from, no, I think I just do that. Maybe, hold on, let me go look at my finished product, make sure I'm not lying to you. Yeah, that. So as soon as that finishes installing, I've got this new third-party library that Microsoft has never touched, never looked at. Open source library for free. Anybody has access to, I can bring it into my SharePoint code, compile it as part of my project, deploy it onto a SharePoint page. And again, nice thing about this is now that we're stepping outside of the Microsoft world, we can do things like that. I don't know how many of you are familiar with exactly what SharePoint Framework is or how it works, but the end result of what I'm doing from all of this is it's going to take all of my code, it's going to compile it down into a single minified JavaScript file. So everything that's happening on here, everything that I'm doing is all JavaScript. It's all being run client side. That JavaScript file gets hosted somewhere on the cloud. And then when the SharePoint page loads, all the SharePoint page knows is where to find that JavaScript file. So it just goes up into the cloud, gets your big, long, insanely long minified JavaScript file, brings it down onto your page, and runs it. So anything that you can do in JavaScript, or in this case TypeScript, which becomes JavaScript, or in Node, or any other kind of development, if it's a front-end library, you can put Angular on this. You can put Vue in this. You can use any sort of front-end JavaScript library that you want to build these SharePoint Framework web parts. Everything at the end of the day is nothing more than just JavaScript that comes down to your client's browser and gets run inside of a SharePoint environment. So we really like the Moment.js library because it makes our lives easier. So we go and get it. It's just JavaScript. We can put any kind of JavaScript we want in here.
Hey, Josh, I want to underscore what you're saying, because just say it a different way. You don't have to hire a SharePoint developer anymore. You hire a web developer. Maybe they know React, maybe they don't, but you say, hey, we just need a web developer, and by default, this uses React. But like you say, it could be Angular, it could be Vue, it could be any of these other technologies. And that has just totally shifted the game in trying to source developers that can work with this platform. It was exactly the test, I'm sure, how hard it is to hire a true SharePoint dev. I mean, it's almost impossible. So trying to source a web developer, maybe they're a little expensive, but there are, 100 times more of them, or 1,000 times more of them out there in the market. So it's much easier for a company to say, hey, we need this expertise, maybe we're going to hire internally, maybe we're going to go to a consulting firm, but the resources available to do this work so much more available.
It also gives you like a connection with other people who might be already in the company or
Yeah.
well. Like before they would have excluded you a little bit.
Right, you're that weird SharePoint guy.
Yeah. Yeah, now you're okay.
So on this topic of how it intersects, because I'm the weird SharePoint guy, and I'm not a code developer, but I've done a lot in SharePoint. So you've got this JavaScript packet that's essentially a web part. Well, I think of a web part as editing a page and selecting one of the web parts, either a list or library or any of the other tools that are custom built.
Which is exactly what we're doing right here.
So that's
Edit the page.
So you'll just put that on it, and you can still, do you still use the properties of the page as far as the page layout and width, the zones and all that kind of stuff, or do you bypass that?
Yes. Yes, you still use. So when we're looking at our local workbench here, or when you go to the live web part page, now we're on a modern page, and so some of those some of those concepts that you talk about have sort of gone away in the modern page. But we can come in here and say, edit the section. And we can say that this is now a 2-column section or whatever. So we can add a web part over into this half, into this section. We can add a different web part into this zone, this section over here. Woo, cool. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. And so using, the modern pages, we can still put pages together the same way that we do on any other modern page. We create these sections, we take web parts, we put them in the sections, that kind of a thing. And then our web part that we're building just lives within whatever section we give it. And the same holds true on the classic pages. So if you have a classic layouts page that sort of does this, sets up a half and half, and you got your web part zones and different things like that. Like I said, the way that we're developing this, we've got that grid layout that will say this row is X big, and I'm going to take up however much space I have within that space. So if you have this half and half layout right here, then it will say I'm going to take up 1/2 of the space that I have available in that web part zone, in that layout that's only given me, you know, X amount of space, and I'm going to take up 1/2 of what's available to me. So we do live inside of that, and it behaves in every way just like any other web part. So like you said, you edit the page, you know, in the classic, you pick your web page layout, you pick the zone that you want to put it in, you go to add, you get that old ribbon that sort of pops out and gives you all the different folders that your web parts live in or whatever. You can define which folder you want these web parts to live in, so you can make a custom folder. And all of your web parts live inside of that one custom folder inside of there. And then you just say, okay, go to the sovereign folder or whatever, find this web part, drop it on the page. And it behaves in all respects like any other web part. It has its own property pane. So again, this is the property pane, what it looks like in the modern pages. We have full access to this. We can add properties to it, remove properties from it. And then in the classic experience, it's a little bit weirder. What it looks like in the classic experience is you hit edit and it opens up your standard normal property pane that you're used to that has those sections in it, you know, the layout section and the zone section, things like that. But then the top section just has a single button that I think is like advanced configuration or something like that. And when you click that top button, it will show you this pane right here. So it pops out this pane, you make whatever changes that you want. You click OK, it goes away, it gives you the old edit pane, you go down to the bottom, click apply, and then everything gets saved. So it does work, and like I said, it's a little bit wonky to try and throw these on one of the classic pages, but not impossible by, you know, a couple more button clicks is really all we're talking about. And it behaves just like any other web part that you got on the page. So where are we? State control. That's a bit of a thing. I've only got about 15 minutes left. I don't know if I can do that in 15 minutes. Do you guys want me to try and dive into that as fast as I can and kind of show you how that works? So this is now the point in the demo where we start moving away from look and feel and how things just appear on the page to where we actually start taking the data, manipulating the data, and putting it into a form that we can eventually then take it and shove it into SharePoint.
Say we have a second class. I like this though, it's awesome.
What else you got, Josh? State control, and then I see more slides.
Yeah, what else are
Interacting with,
Slide.
yeah, so we've got state control. So the way that I like to do this, and this is mostly up to the preference of the developer, is that I like to have sort of a division of responsibilities. And so I've got my web part, and then I have an object that controls how the web part works and looks and functions and interacts. And I've got one kind of super object that controls all of that. And then I've got a little transformation where I take that super object that has to do with the web part, transform it into something that SharePoint understands. And then I've got a separate piece of it that writes to SharePoint, reads from SharePoint, handles all the SharePoint interactions. And then once it gets it back from SharePoint, we go through the reverse translation, put it back into something that the web part can understand and display it. Separation of concern, some people call that a data access layer. I don't know if it's necessarily industry standard, but there's a lot of people who program that way. So that's what these next two slides were about. The state control is how I then take all these things that I'm putting on the page. Hello, we're still here. And then the last slide that I have is, now that you have a web part, it looks nice, it can save its own data internally, it can save the data externally onto SharePoint. How do we then take our package and move it off of our local machine and throw it into the SharePoint environment so that everybody else has access to it and everybody else can see it? Those are my last three slides.
How difficult is that, would you say? Good. Scale 1 to 10.
The deployment?
How many headaches is it?
3 on a scale of 1 to 10. So,
Not nearly as bad as the WSP solution.
oh my goodness.
Like it is,
Complete.
if that's a 10, then this is maybe like a 0.5.
Essentially,
Yeah.
so maybe since we had a question about that, maybe I'll jump right into that and kind of show you how that works. Again, you notice that the way I started my server is I used gulp commands. And so I did gulp serve initially, and that started my server. There's a bunch of other gulp commands that you can do, like gulp build, and that takes all of my code, compiles it down into something that is easily readable by your web browser. That's what does the minification. That's what turns this SCSS code into actual CSS and minifies it, that kind of stuff. Then with SharePoint Framework, and just about every gulp package that you ever get will have a gulp build command. In fact, that's the default. If you just type the word gulp and hit enter, it will run a gulp build. Because we use the Yeoman generator to kind of get this, we get a couple of others as well. We get a gulp bundle. Nope, I missed a flag. Gulp bundle ship. And that's going to tell it, I want you to take that code that you compiled and put down together. And so after the gulp build, we have this library folder right here that has a whole bunch of different, it's got a couple of different JavaScript files, a couple of different CSS files, a couple of different translation language files, but it's still spread out into a bunch of different files. You could technically take that entire folder, drop it onto a web page somewhere, and that web page would be able to run and function normally. That's the build part of it right there. However, we don't want to drop it on just any web page. We want to drop it into SharePoint. So we run the second command that does a gulp bundle for us. And that takes it and makes this distribution object. So now absolutely everything that we built is that. It's taken all of our files, all of our code, all of our CSS, shoved it down into a single JavaScript file that's one line and 70 million characters long. And again, we could theoretically take this file, throw it up onto a web server somewhere, post it, and it should, I think this one still runs too. So this is what we're actually, when I say it takes it and minifies it all down into a single JavaScript, that JavaScript gets hosted on the cloud somewhere. This is the file that we're going to put up on the cloud somewhere, somehow. There's a lot of different ways that we can do that, and I can go into more details about that if we want to. Then the last thing that we're going to do is gulp package solution ship. This final step is where we create something that SharePoint understands. So we're going to create a small little package. If any of you are familiar with the WSP things that we used to have or whatever, there was a zip file that contained a bunch of code that we had to deploy and then sometimes restart the server and turn features on and off, and yada, yada, yada. That's essentially what this is trying to create. So it's going to create a single file, and that file is essentially going to tell SharePoint, this is the name of our web part, this is the group that it lives in, this is who has permissions to it, and this is the location of where to get that big JavaScript file. So all the things that SharePoint cares about are going to be contained in this file right here. And that shows up
Super good stuff, Josh.
right here. Give me 2 more seconds, I'll answer your question. Once we have that package file,
Which is just a zip, right?
yep, it's just a zip file. We go to our app catalog, and I can get into more detail about how to do that. But you drag this package file into the app catalog, and you are deployed. That's literally how you deploy your code. You take this, drag it in here, pops up and says, hey, are you really sure you want to do this? You say, yes, I really want to do this. And boom, we have deployed our code. Now I should be able to go onto any of the SharePoint pages on this tenant and find demo 1 as a standard web part that shows up, and everybody now has access to it. Is that fast?
Awesome.
See you, Pete. Thanks for coming. Now, like I said, this is not a very good web part at this point. It doesn't do any of the interactions with SharePoint and those 2 slides that I just kind of skipped, but I knew I wasn't going to get to everything in today's presentation. So that's what you get. Any last questions?
Mingo, you had me at hello world. Awesome.
Look forward to using this in 10 years. I'm sorry. So when you go through the process to start this up, when you go through the hello world stuff that I kind of yada-yada'd over right at the very beginning, it gives you a number of options. One of the very first questions that it asks you is, are you going to be building this for 2016? You're going to be building this for online? You're going to be building it for both? Or do you just want to use the latest and greatest of whatever we have available to us? So when, you know, in 10 years you do get to an on-premise 2016, you actually will be able to use a lot of what we're doing right here. Some of the functionality won't be there. Everything that I've shown you today will be, but some of the more advanced functionality, some of the easier ways of interacting with SharePoint. One of the nice things about this framework is that it allows us to authenticate to SharePoint very, very easily. So when I'm going to a list or a library saying, hey, give me all the data out of there, it's already security trimmed, it already knows who I am logged in and things like that, and will only return data to me based off of who is currently logged in looking at that page. Those things all are very, very nice. In the later versions of the SharePoint framework, in the earlier versions of the SharePoint framework, it's a pain in the butt. And right now, most of the 2016 on-premise installations have to use those earlier versions, but that's really, really hard. 2019 fixes that, so if you have an on-premise 2019, you should be able to use the latest version of this, use all the good authentication, that kind of stuff should be really, really nice. So your online and your on-premise 2019 experience are very, very similar. 2016, it's work. But maybe when you get there, you'll be able to use a lot of this and build these things for yourself. I saw one other hand.
How's Teams related with all of this now? Because I understand a lot of SharePoint development is going away because of Teams.
I wouldn't necessarily say going away.
Not being utilized as much?
Well, so the promise, and I haven't actually tested this out yet, so I'm not a good authority on this right now, but what Microsoft's promise is you can see that when I went through when I started this demo and I downloaded their templates or whatever, I have this Teams folder right here, and it created these files for me. I thought there'd be more in there. and their promise is that anything that you build using this as a web part, now you can use this to build something called an extension, which is an entirely different monster, and we're not going to go into that right now. But any web part that you build from this can also be automatically included as a Teams extension. So if I install this properly into the Teams equivalent of their app catalog, essentially their library of where they can get these parts from, in my Teams folder, I can create a new tab across the top or whatever and say, for this new tab, put this web part right on there. And their promise is that it works exactly the same. Anything that you develop for a SharePoint web part that you can put onto a SharePoint page, you can also create as a tab in a Teams environment. Yeah, Teams is SharePoint as SharePoint is Teams.
That's kind of the point I wanted to make is when you do that, you can think of this SPFx web part being put on an empty SharePoint page, and that page is being added as a new tab in Teams.
That's how we used to have to do it, actually.
Right, and it's basically
they've streamlined that a little bit.
What's happening, you know, they're just kind of streamlining that process to make that a little more easier point and click, where you go to your app catalog in your Teams channel and you say add an app, and you pick that web part, and it just goes pop and shows up just like you were adding, you know, a planner board or something else. But since your team is backed by a SharePoint site where the documents and other things live, it's basically just creating another page there where it can host your web part. So it's still in SharePoint. It's just obscure.
So yes, their promise was that anything that you build in the SharePoint framework should work equally well in both places. And they have also hinted that the things that you build in here, again, because it's just JavaScript. JavaScript runs client-side. Anything that can run JavaScript can run this kind of stuff. And they've hinted that a lot of these web parts, they're going to try and move into other Office 365 things. So someday, the dream is that you'd be able to develop a web part like this and include it in Outlook. Or you'd be able to include it in Excel. You've seen those little pop-out panes that come from the side of Word or Excel or something like that. You should be able to design a web part that's only 300 pixels wide or whatever, include it as an add-in inside of Word, and then just with a single button click in the ribbon, pop that out, and the exact same web part, the exact same form that you're developing. You know, most of what I do, 99% of what I do is building forms for people. They want a nice way to interact with a SharePoint list or library using this form or whatever. And a lot of them have to do with document management. So I upload this document onto this page, and it forces me to fill out certain bits of metadata or something to go with it to help the catalog or the search algorithm or something like that. But how interesting would it be if you didn't actually have to go to SharePoint to do that? I finished my document inside of Word. There's a nice little button that my developer made for me that says upload this to SharePoint. The form pops out at the side of Word, and I fill in all the metadata, the categories, the name, the permissions, or whatever right in there, hit save, and it uploads it to SharePoint for me with all the metadata filled in. I never had to leave Word. Cool.
And really, that's how you can do it.
Yeah.
That's how I do it.
That's what he's doing now.
That's their promise. Their promise is that what you build in Framework will work identically in all of these different environments. Now, right now, the only place that it does is Teams and SharePoint. Those two will work identically. If you wanted to use this to build specifically a Word plugin, you absolutely could, but it might look funny in SharePoint. Or if you built it in SharePoint, it might look funny in Word. They don't have exact parity between the two. You could develop two separate apps for each of those applications. Right now, their promise is that if you build something for SharePoint, it will work in Teams and vice versa. That should be the same development experience. If you wanted to put something in Word, the capability is there, but it's not going to be an exact parity with the capability of SharePoint or Teams. Does that make sense?
So really, what I've done is, once you build those forms, you can expose them anywhere. So if you wanted an Outlook, or if you wanted Word, or any of those things, I make it and add it, and you can push it in. You can really expose that same web interface at any of those locations.
Yeah, and you could even make it behave differently. One of the things that we didn't get into, one of the slides, is something called the context. So inside this web part that I'm building, I can ask SharePoint, what context am I in? And that can tell me a whole bunch of different things. It can tell me who is logged in. It can tell me what permissions they have, what groups they're part of, what the size of the page is, what the URL of the page that I'm on. I can ask a whole bunch of things about the context that I'm living in. And one of the other things that I can ask that context is, what program am I living in? So it can tell me that I'm working in a SharePoint environment, and I could build something that behaves entirely one way in a SharePoint environment. But if I ask the context and it tells me I'm in an Excel environment, I could build something that behaves an entirely different way. So using that particular methodology, you could build a single web part, a single plugin, essentially, that you could install in both places and have it look slightly differently or behave slightly differently or whatever in both of those different places with just a single web part that you've added to your library. Again, it's all JavaScript. Anything that can run JavaScript can run SPFx web parts.
How do you control the scope? So if you didn't want your web part, like open the whole tenant, maybe you just wanted it to a site collection.
Yeah.
So there are, I told you about the app catalog. Initially when it came out, they just had the tenant-wide app catalog. And anything that you put in there was available to the entire tenant. Now you could, this is just a SharePoint list, as you can see, everybody's familiar with SharePoint lists. You could permission this. So you could go in and say only these people or these groups or whatever have access to this file. And then only the people who have access to this file in this document library would have access to being able to add the app. However, they have just recently, maybe 2 months ago, come out with site-specific app catalogs. Now, as far as I know, the only way to enable those is using a PNP library through PowerShell. There's not a really nice, pretty way to do it, but you can go do a Google search for, PNP site app catalog or whatever, and it should give you pretty good documentation. But you type in the correct PNP command, tell it which site you want to enable an app catalog on, and then it will just show up in your site contents. So you'll have your site pages, your documents, your list, libraries, or whatever, and then there'll just be app catalog down there. And anything that you drag into that app catalog will be restricted to that site and its subsites. That's fairly new. And we had a lot of yip-de-doo-dahs when they did that, because we've been asking for it for a long time. So we want to have a development site where we can like deploy this and give it access to some people, but we don't want the entire, and that's also really good for versioning as well. It will override any, so if we have a production version that's on the tenant app catalog, but we want to test out an update or something like that, we can install our update into the site app catalog. It will override the tenant one, then we can test out our update to the version once we're happy with it and shown it to a bunch of people and they're good with it. Then we can deploy that to the tenant-wide app catalog and it will be sent out everywhere.
If you click on the 3 little dots, I really thought there was an option there to deploy site-specific legal or tenant. Just joking. I've seen, I know what you're talking about, though. You can definitely deploy to site-specific, just specific site collections for sites.
I think that's, I played in that a little bit, but on mine it's a different world slow.
Okay, that's time. Sorry I didn't leave any for general questions. I guess, so first, any more questions about this specifically, about the presentation? I mean, I'm willing to stay here.
No questions for Josh.
Wait, for Josh, what? Yeah, any other, so we normally like to reserve the last 15 minutes and I blew through that because you didn't give me the high sign.
The lights went out.
But yeah, we try to reserve the last 15 minutes or so just for general questions, open to anybody to ask anybody anything SharePoint, Microsoft, Office related. Do we have any of those questions? Anybody want to ask just anything in general? We pool the community knowledge.
I was just going to say that there's a lot of demo parts too out there on GitHub that you can run down and play with.
I believe it.
That's been playing with that to download it and then tweak it. There's a lot of sample code in there that you can take and, you can build, change it however you want. Just all open source.
That's as far as I ever go.
Yeah.
I gotta say, Sue, that's one of the best presentations of, this to me is like going to a SharePoint Saturday thing. You did a very good job, took beyond a layman and helped me to see where you can go with this. I loved it, really. I mean, you've given me some good things to go back now to the web team at the county. Because I've had discussions in the past and going forward, like, do we need to hire a SharePoint developer? The fact that you backed up and said, no, you just need to look at other things, do JavaScript, where do you place?
So you need to hire someone as Pete.
Yes.
Well, I think it would be actually, but I'm just saying, this was awesome for personal development and just thinking beyond that. This was cool.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I did actually, Greg, I don't know if you've seen this or not yet, but I did go onto the SPS events website today and signed up to give this exact presentation at SharePoint Saturday. So,
So we gonna skip that one?
yeah, no, yeah, you've already seen it. Congratulations. Hopefully, I'll improve it between now and February. So, all right. Thank you all very much. Stop the recording or pause it or
Just.